year, one of my favorite things to do is to talk to law students and talk to people in the legal community. One thing I was telling Larry is that I enjoy talking to students so much that I don't want to live my life in 6-minute increments anymore, practicing in a firm. I like to do more with students. And so I don't tell my firm this, but I really like to teach. And it's because I have, over time, learned so much from the students with whom I've interacted, including the little kids at the Boys and Girls Clubs. They would ask the most thought-provoking questions when I would talk to them about the law. And law students and young lawyers always went with me on these journeys. And, they would ask me questions like, what if you got a case you didn't believe in? What would you do? 8-year-olds asking these type of questions. Of course, I had other people to ask me when they found out that I was older than their grandmother. They would ask me whether I knew any abolitionists. But it was and very serious things too. They were totally serious. Because, when you're young, your perception of age is really quite different. So, but, it's a part of the joy of being a lawyer. And even though I might want to do something different, I have never lost my zeal or my love for the law. It is the greatest profession that there is. It is the most noblest of all professions, in my opinion. And as I told the young people who said they wanted to be Beyonce or Michael Jordan, I'm like, they need lawyers? I said, and they have lawyers, probably many of them. And so there's nothing really, I said, even if you decide that you want to invent something, you need a lawyer. Everybody needs a lawyer. No matter what you do, no matter what walk of life you choose, you need a lawyer, so why not just be one? And be the go-to person that everybody needs. So, I am a big promoter of people going to law school. And I do not subscribe to the theory that there are too many lawyers. I don't believe that, because if there were too many lawyers, there wouldn't be as many people who did not have access to justice. And so we need to have lawyers who are right-thinking people who are in every aspect of the law. I remember when I was in law school, because I'm African-American, people would say, oh no, you don't want to be a prosecutor, those are the bad guys. But prosecutors are the most key people, in my opinion, in the criminal justice system. They're the ones who decide who's going to get charged and what they'll be charged with. And so the bottom line is that we need all sorts of people everywhere. We need people who are going to start innovative law firms where they can charge reasonable fees so that middle-class people can afford legal services. And we want to create a culture and environment where people will understand that it's a responsibility to give back to your communities, and from time to time do some pro bono cases. And we need young, creative, thinking minds, which is why I like to hang out with young people so much, so that I can stay up on what's going on. A lot of times people really think I'm mentoring young people. I'm being mentored. I am learning so much from young people and all of good, because I confess, young people are so much smarter than I am. And I said, if I knew then, or if I had taken the time that all of you take now with your thought process and how you process things and how you strategize, that I could probably be rich or something. But I am just really excited that you have chosen to become lawyers. I know that you'll do well. I know that sometimes there'll be challenges, but always we can turn a challenge into an opportunity. I don't regret one single day, and this is the truth, not one single day that I decided to become a lawyer. It has been the way that I think about things, the way that I process things, what law school teaches you to think in a certain way that I never thought before. has just made me, I think, a more full person. I just also want to tell you that even though you become a lawyer, you know, especially after your first year, you really think you know everything. You just, you know, you want to give all the advice because you've taken one course. And I remember my brother telling me that when I was telling him something, he had gotten hurt at work, and I was trying to tell him something, and he's like, "You are not Perry Mason." and I was offended, but you know, it turned out he was right. And what did I know about workers' comp? Nothing. But I had been to law school for a year, so apparently I knew everything. But you know, so we have to keep ourselves in check about things like that, and we also have to remember the communities from where we came. You know, just because we have a law degree does not mean that we're still not Paulette or Amia. You don't have on a name tag, so green jacket. That we are still, you know, we still have to remember our families and from the communities from where we came, that we have an ongoing responsibility. The law degree is more than a piece of paper. It is a real privilege. It is a license to do good and to make sure the rule of law is maintained in this country and elsewhere. And so it is just really a privilege for me to be here. And when you go to law school is a really, really, really new experience for me because, you know, as Larry mentioned, I did not know any lawyers. But what I found that if you talk to other people share similar experiences, so that way you don't feel alone. So don't be afraid to say you don't know something. Don't be afraid to go back to your professor and say, explain this to me again. There's no harm in that. It's better to get an explanation than to be walking around wondering. And don't wait until the last minute. Your first few months in law school are really, really critical. And I found that there's no time to play catch-up when you're in law school. Not like undergraduate school where you got a little time to catch up. There's no time to play catch-up in law school. And so, you know, get with a study group, get some mentors, and mentors can be people in the school, outside of the school. They can be anybody. You know, don't be thin-skinned. You know what your mission is. Keep your eyes on the prize, but never remember from which you've come. Well, one of the biggest challenges I had is really not understanding a lot of the concepts in terms. There were a lot of kids in my class who had parents who were lawyers and who they were really like entitled. And so I actually started taking some of my classes in the evening school where the people were working and they knew what it was that they had to do. But some of that was just a little too much for me. The other challenge I had was, and I'll be honest with this, is that have you ever heard of the term stereotype threat? So let me tell you what it is. So stereotype threat is you know, sometimes they will say girls don't do well in math. And so people say it enough, then girls believe that they will not do well in math. And so they won't do the best that they can do. And so when I went to law school, in the day and evening school, there were a total of 8 African Americans in the law school. There were no Asians, no Hispanics, no openly LGBT. And so we were it. And there was an expectation that we would not do well. And so that had been ingrained, I guess, in so many people. And I guess I have to give some credit to my undergraduate school, Howard, because I never had those notions, because we were always taught to just that we were the best. And we've got a little arrogance about us too, but it's okay. And so a lot of the African American students at the end of their first year ended up on academic probation. And I did not, because I didn't know that that was expected of me. And so I wasn't, and so I was actually asked, why aren't you on academic probation? So that was just really, I'm like, what are you talking about? But you know, but it was it sort of tied into, at my going away party, a woman told me not to feel badly when I flunked out my first year of law school. So those were some of the challenges, in addition to just kind of learning the language and understanding the Paul's graph case, you know. I'm like, this makes no sense to me. But it's just, an understanding, and also back then, our exams started January 2nd, our finals. I thought that was cruel and unusual punishment. So all during the holidays, you're just studying. And understanding that it was really important to be in a study group, that you can't ask and answer the questions to yourself. You need somebody else's opinion to make sure that you're thinking along the right lines. I was the first woman of color to be president of the ABA, right? Right. One of the first things a good, well-intended friend said to me, I hope that you won't, because you're the first woman of color, I hope you won't make diversity and inclusion the main thing that you do. And I said, really? I'm like, so if I don't do it, who will do it? It was, even if I tell you a challenge, I don't want anybody to get the impression that I did not have one fabulous time. I can tell you some unexpected good stories that I'd like to share, that when I went to places like Montana and South Dakota and Kansas, how welcoming people were to me, and how I did a program in, where was I? Kansas, and the Koch brothers bought a table. Yeah. Things like that were surprising, and we were able to do these implicit bias training videos for judges, prosecutors, and public defenders. And I had the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey on my 360 commission that was working on this, and he told me that we had to take a walk in the park one day. But I told him, he said, we're not going to be able to do all these things. He said, because I'm on the committee with the U.S. Attorney, and we've been talking about doing this training for U.S. attorneys for all this time, and you're talking about doing it in 1 year, and us formulating this. I said, Paul, we're going to do this. I said, we're going to do this. And so then I talked to Sally Yates, his boss, and I said, Paul was saying that you were trying to do this, and he didn't think that we would. She said, really? So they asked to see what we were doing, and then about a month later, the Justice Department announced there would be implicit bias training for all U.S. attorneys. And I got a call and said, it's because of what you're doing. And so I can tell you tons of good, unexpected outcomes. And there were some things, but the things that challenges came internally from the people within the ABA, the leaders, So when, for example, I was making my appointments, and I said that we have to use the Rooney Rule. Don't bring me a slate of all white guys for me to appoint. And when they did, I said, you have to go back. I can't take this. And staff gets involved a lot in the appointments process, and some of them were not happy with me. I had people to tell me that on the Women's Commission, we've only had one man on the Women's Commission, and so that's the way it is. I said, not this year. We're going to have 2 men on the Women's Commission. And so, in some groups, they would say that, there are no people experienced in this area. We're the only ones who are experts. The other thing I said is that the ABA has 400,000 members. If you have served 3 years on something, it's time for you to move on, to give somebody else a chance. So that even if you can't appoint 400,000 people, you have to let people know that they have a chance. And so, I actually removed the past president from a position. Yes. And I said, because you can't start making exceptions. Because when you start making exceptions, then you get yourself into trouble. And so, I went to him personally and explained it to him. And I gave him another important role, but I said, you have to move on from this. And I said, you've already done it for 4 years. And so this would be a fifth if I appointed you, reappointed you again. And so, so there were some people who were not always happy with me, but, I wanted to make sure when I announced, how many, what percentage of women I had appointed, what percentage of people of color I had appointed. It was like almost a sucking in, but I'm like, don't be alarmed and afraid. I could only appoint 1/3 of the people. So everyone's different. I am a slow learner. So I could only do one outside activity and go to law school. And I had a part-time job, which was an easy part-time job. But I really am, it takes me a while, and I know I have to put in extra time. And I know that law school requires a lot of time. And so to me, law school is your first job. It's your absolute first job. And that's what you should focus most of your attention on. And if you have time to do something else, I would not recommend a multitude of things. What's your main job? The reason you're in law school is to learn how to be a lawyer. So that should be your main focus. Back in those days, you didn't specialize for things. And they didn't have that back then. So I went to law school 73 to 76. So they didn't have that kind of thing. And then it's interesting because my career counselor, she only recommended that we go to the public defender's office or legal services. So, but I got really, really, really lucky because one of my classmates who graduated the year before me, his wife worked at Johnson & Johnson. And the person she worked for, who was the head of HR, was going to work for this steel company. And 76 was the year that ERISA became effective, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act. And they were looking for anybody, I call it any sucker, who was willing to learn. And so I raised my hand. So my first job out of law school was in a corporation. I worked for a steel company doing ERISA work. So it was, it wasn't as a result of anything particular thing that I studied, but I will tell you that law school makes you think a different way. It trains your brain. You don't even know that it's happening until it's over, that you really just think and process things in a different way. I have to tell you, maybe some people know, but I didn't realize what was going on, and that suddenly I was thinking about things in a really different way. So it really kind of didn't matter that I didn't have a particular focus of a particular subject area in law school, because I was just thinking a different kind of way. And also, back then, people didn't specialize like they do now. So